Years ago, I think the first Sunday I preached here, 20-some years ago, Alyssa Clark stood over here at, 8, 9, she was a little thing, grabbed that mic and sang, and you all applauded at the end, and I thought, I have to follow that? There it is. So, hey, it's good to be back after being away last week on this beautiful Lord's Day morning. Last week we were able to, Margie and I, able to go down to Bristol, Tennessee, and do our Lomison family Christmas at her house. And our other two daughters, Cassie and Crystal, with their spouses were there, and of course our 4 youngest grandchildren. And if you're wondering how many that is, it's like 12 in the same house. 12 people all remaining together in her 3-bedroom house for 48 hours. Did I mention it's good to be back this morning? And, it was all good, or mostly good, because thankfully there was a full, not only the 3 bedrooms, but a full basement downstairs where Cassie's tribe camped out, and 3 bathrooms in the house. So it was close quarters, but it was doable. Would you like to see a picture? Well, good. Let's put it up there. There they are, the Lomison tribe. That's the silly picture. We're not normally like that much. Okay, we can put that back down now. And a few monkeys in there, okay? And anyway, the whole Lomison family wasn't there. We do have 3 adult grandchildren in Pennsylvania, along with the 2 spouses, and so there were 5 not there. But that's pretty much our little branch of the Lomison family tree. Talking about family trees, I thought this morning, that picture, is our family, but I thought I'd share a few more to show you the tree from which I'm connected. Okay, so if we could go ahead and put the next picture up. Yes, okay, so that's Jacob and Rebecca Hayton. That's my great-grandparents. Obviously spiritual people, Jacob and Rebecca, so I know a little bit about them, but anyway, and then they had a daughter named Relda. There she is. These aren't the greatest pictures, but that's Relda. That's my grandmother, and she married my grandfather Leroy, but we call him Pappy Roy, and they had, half a dozen or more children. I never met her. She passed away before I was born, and so then my grandfather remarried, and I knew that woman, May, as my grandmother. But that was, as far as biological roots, that's my grandmother. And and so she married this next guy. There in the middle, that's Pappy Roy, and they're quite. Now you're seeing the roots, aren't you? Yeah, there he is. You can see me now, can't you? And that's my dad on the right, and his little brother, who's bigger than him, Don, on the left. And Pap and Dad are both gone, and my Uncle Don now I think is 93 years old, something like that. And so, yes, we can put them down now. And so that's a little bit of my family tree. I know a little bit more. Actually, when my grandfather passed away in 1995, he had 154 descendants. And he had a bunch of children, and they had a bunch of children. And actually, I don't know how many that branch contains anymore, but I knew them all by name and knew half of them personally. We all lived in kind of the same general area there in Pennsylvania. And their oldest child, Betty, we called her Aunt Bet. Their clan, just their little section, that family now totals somewhere around 160, 170. Now, they were more productive than the rest of the clans, but my grandfather's family tree has grown quite large, okay? And who knows how big my great-grandfather's family tree is, right? So I have some knowledge of the various branches. I've never done one of those Ancestry.com things, but I am interested in history, and I have been interested in this. I got these pictures, and I passed them on to my daughters yesterday because it just dawned on me that our granddaughter, Rebecca, while she wasn't named after great-grandmother Rebecca, is her namesake, and so that was pretty cool. So anyway, here's the thing. When you start looking, though, and you probably didn't do this, but it was obvious to me because I've done this before, but when you start looking at those pictures a little closer, you can see how some physical traits get passed down, right? Like if you would, I pulled those back up, and I won't do that to them, but you would notice they all have similar noses. Okay, my dad used to joke that he could hang in a cherry tree by his nose and pick cherries with both hands. And so he was kind of proud of it. I'm not sure why. But we all have that, right? We all have something like that. I mean, we all have different things that have been passed down to us from our ancestors, and it might not, it might be just me, but I think it's interesting, actually, to study and learn where it is you come from and why it is you are who you are. But we all have this. If we look into it and we study it, there's this thing about the ancestry stuff that is, there are just some things that we're grateful for, and then there's some things where maybe not so much, right? The truth is, some parts of our family tree, we really don't want that to continue, right? Like if we were being honest, there might be a couple little branches we'd just rather nip in the bud, right? And that'd be the end of it. And we'd want some of what shows up on our branch to be different than what shows up on the other branch, okay, of the family tree. And honestly, if you've kind of looked deeply at this or studied this, if you looked into your history or your personal history, there's a fair chance that you probably have some of your own examples of this, but sometimes it's physical attributes like noses, but sometimes it's not, okay? But there are branches that we see and we're like, well, look at that. Our branches may connect to the same tree, but that's not going to be me, right? That's not going to be me. And honestly, we probably all have some of that. And if you're following me, church family, like when you were growing up, parents are the easiest thing. You might remember this. When you're wee little, you think, they're superheroes, and then you get to know them as you grow up, and you realize they're maybe not, okay? But at some point, you probably caught something in your parents' attributes. Maybe it was physical, but I'm really relating more to not physical, but something behavioral. And whatever it was, you saw that something in your mom and dad, and maybe it was a big thing, or maybe it was just a little thing. But anyway, you were like, our two branches may be connected to the same tree, but that's not going to be me, okay? That's not going to be me, okay? All of us have some of that flowing through our family trees. Wouldn't you say, church? Good, okay. 6 of you. Good, okay. Anyway, maybe you grew up in a home that wasn't very affectionate, okay? And not a lot of warmth flowing through that branch of the tree, but you said, you know what? When it's my time, I'm going to do it differently. I'm going to be more intentional to be affectionate and speak words of love and be more tender. And so, yeah, our branches may connect to the same tree, but that's not going to be me. That right there is not going to be me. Or maybe you come from a family that was racist, and you remember the comments, and you remember the words that were spoken, and you remember the jokes, and you were determined, you know what? That's going to stop right there, okay? It stops with you. Like your branches may be connected to the same tree, our branches may be connected to the same tree, but you're going to bear some different fruit than that, okay? Or you come from a line of alcoholics and you see what that produced, and you're like, that's not going to be my story. We're going to do some things different. So yeah, our branches may connect to the same tree, but that's not going to be me. And the point I'm trying to make here is I think it's fair to say that we all have some areas when we look at our family tree where we feel pretty strongly about that, okay? And so everyone following me so far, church family? Okay, we good? Yeah? All right. Okay, so I was reading a story about this man's family this past week. So let me tell you about the family tree of this man named John, okay? So John had a brother named James, and they were really close, and they were close in age, and they were a lot alike. Now, John and James, they grew up in a home where they learned to be fishermen at a young age, and their dad's name was Zebedee, okay? And I imagine they called him Zeb for short. And the story of Zeb was that he worked his son's hard, and he was hard on them, right? And so there's not a lot of warmth, there's not a lot of affection, or so it would seem in that home as John grew up. And as he got a little bit older, he began to have this reputation of having a little bit of a bad temper, but so did other people in the family. His brother was the same way, James, he was the very same way. And so these two brothers, they were kind of reactive, okay? And they would sometimes get a little angry, and you wouldn't want to say the wrong thing around John because he might, kind of overreact, and he was going to get a little bit angry and maybe make some threats, and his voice was going to rise, and that's just the way John was. And his brother James, well, they were both kind of the same way. In fact, they were given the nicknames because they had they were kind of a little bit of a violent or angry nature, that they were given the nicknames of Sons of Thunder. Sons of Thunder, Now, I've always thought they were part of a biker gang. But as it turns out, they started up this tag team wrestling duo. I think we have a picture. Can we put it up? There they are. James and John. No, that's not James and John. And actually, they're not in a biker gang either. James and John and James were actually what? They were Jesus' disciples. They were disciples of Christ. Okay, in fact, they were two of what becomes known as the 12 disciples. 12 with a capital T. Okay, and now John biblically is known as the disciple that Jesus loved the most. Okay, of course it was John who wrote that, so there is that. But the truth is, John was indeed one of the closest disciples of Jesus. Okay, when you read other people besides John, that is true. And it is Jesus who gave him the nickname, by the way, that he would be one of the two brothers. I mean, the two brothers would be called the sons of thunder. It was Jesus that named them that. Okay, and by the way, there's an example of this nature that we see in John early on as he's following Jesus. And in Luke chapter 9, Jesus is with his disciples and they're traveling and they go through this region of Samaria and they need a place to stay. So it's nighttime, and they need a place to stay for the night, a place to crash, but nobody welcomes them, and John sees the way that Jesus is being treated, and he's just a little bit irate about it. And so he says, and this is John speaking to Jesus in Luke 9:54, he says, "Lord, do you want us to call down fire from heaven and destroy them?" So I mean, we don't normally think of John this way, but there he is, okay? And when I read it, I always try to personalize it, visualize it, and he's going like, can we can we call down fire, And Jesus is like, and this is paraphrased, I'm not sure you know how to do that, John, but no, it's not necessary. We're not doing that. In fact, the Bible says that Jesus rebuked John, and Jesus was not overly sensitive, Like, in fact, Jesus never gets offended because of an insult that's hurled at him, because, like, he knew who he was, and he knew who he was in God's sight, and so his significance wasn't dependent on what people thought of him. He was secure in who he was, okay? So he wasn't easily offended, but apparently John was, because when John, sees the way that Jesus is treated, he's ready to call down fire from heaven and destroy those people, all because of the way they treated Jesus. So you see it. It's John, and he's one of the sons of thunder. And here's the thing, church family. He's the one who's going to talk to us today about Jesus in his final days before his crucifixion in John 15. So, we're in a series that we're studying here in John 15, which is part of what's called the final discourse of Jesus, which in its fullness starts in John 14 and runs all the way through John 17. But John 15 is a part of all that, and we may come back and do some of the rest before and after later on this year. But John 15 has a theme throughout it that I think will speak words of wisdom into our present season as a church and as a people that's part of something bigger than ourselves. Okay? So we good? Good so far. Help me out. All right, so to be clear, John 15, and if you haven't turned there, you might want to, but there are some final words of Jesus before he would be crucified, or to be more precise, his final words to his closest followers. And I don't want to spoil the end of this series, but as we study John 15, it's going to feel like we just set this up for this season of time that we're in, because Jesus is going to talk to us about loving, and Jesus is going to talk to us about not being caught off guard when people don't like us, okay, and he's going to talk to us about keeping unity despite the differences, okay? And John 15, this series, we're starting, it's entitled Remain, okay? It's entitled Remain, and it's John, the son of thunder, who's talking to us about these final moments in Jesus' life, and the message of hope for tomorrow and eternity, and all his disciples is, if you will only remain. If you will only remain. And yeah, he's going to talk about the family tree, and he's going to say that he is the tree and we are the branches, okay? And the theme throughout is, if you're going to be in this family tree, if we're going to grow and be the branch that we were meant to be, if we're going to produce the fruit that he desires us to produce, then we're going to have to stay connected to Jesus no matter what. No matter what. Like, our priority of the day and the new year is on staying connected, or in one word, we must remain. We must remain. So this series title, Remain, is what we're going to talk about. But before we get into John 15 any deeper, let's look at some context, or look at the setting, if you will. So in the chapter before, like, chapter 14, which comes right before chapter 15, that chapter, it's all taking place in the upper room and the place where they were. This is where the Last Supper takes place. And so at this point, they've had the Last Supper. Jesus has been talking to his followers and saying to them, you need to believe in me. In this world, you're going to have trouble, but believe in me. Okay? And then they stand up, and Judas has already left. Okay? He's already left to go betray Jesus. And so Jesus has everyone stand up, and they leave the upper room, and they start walking to the Garden of Gethsemane. Now, if you're checking John 14 to see where it says, he told them that we're going to the garden. It doesn't say we're going to the Garden of Gethsemane, okay? And if you're checking me, that's good, okay? But it doesn't say that Jesus told them where they were going, but it would seem that they all know where they're going, that this was a typical walk every night, that they were going to go pray in the garden. That's how Jesus knew where to find Jesus, because this is where he goes every night, okay? So Jesus knows what awaits him. Okay, he knows what awaits him, but the disciples don't fully realize it, but Jesus does. So, if you're Jesus, what do you say to your disciples if you know all this is coming? What do you say? Well, as he's walking, he notices the vines and the branches that stretch alongside the road, and they've been growing there, some of them probably for generations. And so as they walk, he says to them in John 15:5, and this verse is going to serve as the theme verse for the message today, as well as the anchor verse for the whole series, as we study through the whole chapter. Okay, so Jesus says to his disciples in verse 5, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. You can do nothing. Okay? In other words, what you need to remember, guys, is that I'm the vine and you're the branches. Right? So, that's the picture that you have to keep in mind, he's telling them. And no matter what happens, no matter what circumstances that you find yourself dealing with or what kind of uncertainty you face, just remember, you are the branch, you're not the vine. You're the branch. And you don't try to find peace within yourself, and you don't try to find strength within yourself. That's not your job. Your job, that's my job. Okay, that's what I'm going to give you. No, your job is to stay connected to me, to remain in me. My job is to make sure that you have the peace, the joy, the strength, whatever it is that you need for this journey. I'll give it to you. You remain in me. So, in the final verse of John 15, or the first verse of John 15, and we're going to get to this next week in more detail, but Jesus says, he starts off here, I am the true vine. Isn't that interesting? He says, I'm the true vine. There might have been vines before, but I'm the true one, right? So when people say, boy, that was a good sermon this week, preacher, I'm going compared to last week? So he says, I'm the true vine. Compared to what? Okay, well, I say that because you do a little study on this metaphor throughout Scripture, and here's what you'll find. In the Old Testament, the vine metaphor was used to describe the people of God. So in the Old Testament, the vine was the people of God, yeah. And it usually was used in a context of rebuke, where God's rebuking his people, saying something like, people of Israel, you're the vine, but you're not bearing any fruit. People of Israel, you're the vine. This is what you've been called to do. This is what you've been called to be, but you're not living out your calling. You're the vine. Why don't you have this fruit in your life? So to be clear, in the Old Testament, the vine was a metaphor for God's people, yeah. Now, Jesus gets to John 15, and he's like, we're going to change this up, okay? Or better yet, we're going to recreate this, okay? And so I'm going to flip the metaphor for you. So now, I'm the vine, and you're the branch. He's saying this, to his disciples, his people, okay? I'm the vine, okay? And they're like, well, wait, I thought we were the vine. Okay, no, you're not the vine. I'm the vine, you're the branch, okay? Why, Jesus? Because you couldn't do it. You tried to be the vine, and I appreciate the effort, but when you were the vine, you just didn't bear the kind of fruit that God wanted to see in you or through you. So from now on, I'm the vine, you're the branch. And in me, you'll bear much fruit. And it's like they go, okay, Jesus, I'm the branch. Okay, so Jesus, if I'm the branch, then what am I supposed to be doing? Okay, so what do I do? Okay, well, you be the branch. And your job is to stay connected to the vine. Your job is to remain connected to me, because in me, you will find what you couldn't find in yourself. Okay? Do you see it, church family? He wants to do for you what you can't do on your own. He wants to produce in you what you can't seem to produce in yourself. Because if you're over here being the vine and you've tried that, it's not going well, right? Sooner or later, it's not going to go well, and you're just, it's not. And I mean, when you're trying to be self-sufficient, everything, eventually, it's going to fall apart, and you're trying to produce joy, and you're reading some self-help books, and you've got the best practices in a sermon outline form, like I got 3 points on how I'm going to do this. Like point 1, I'm going to produce joy. Okay, and Jesus is like, no, you're not. Okay, because you're not the vine, you're the branch. I'm going to produce joy. Okay, and if you'll just remain in me and stay connected to me, well, watch, you're going to grow joy in your life. Okay, so Jesus says, I'm the true vine, you be the branch. Okay, so that's what we're talking about in this series is how do we do that? Okay, how do we stay connected to Jesus no matter what? Okay, how do we remain in him? What raises some questions, I think, because for them at least, this is new. Okay, and for some, it might be new. Cause new things can be hard to get. So how do we find in him what a lot of us have spent years trying to produce in ourselves, and we're just kind of done with that because, we're frustrated, we're tired, we're discouraged, we're defeated. So how do we find that now in Jesus? Okay, so the title of the message is Remain, a Call to Connect. And I don't know if you've noticed this. Well, I'm sure you have, but we're going to highlight it here this morning, okay? Like in marketing, okay? I don't know if you ever pay attention to marketing, but there's kind of this growing trend for brands to become lifestyle brands. I know you know this one. It'll be evident here in a minute. Case in point, let's talk clothing brand, like Harley Davidson. Any of you know Harley Davidson? Yeah, okay. And so you might see this. Imagine you see a Harley Davidson t-shirt on someone, And if you're a Harley Davidson person, you're going to connect to that right away. But what you'll see there sometimes on this t-shirt is the words member for life. Member for life. And the implication is if you have a Harley Davidson motorcycle or even maybe a Harley Davidson t-shirt, you're now part of the community and this is part of your identity. You are a member for life. So the Harley Davidson brand, it's a lifestyle brand. If you didn't get that one, here's one I didn't know what it was for. I kind of knew, but I didn't really know. Another example would be the Salt Life. The Salt Life. Have you seen this one, right? Like I'm sure you've seen t-shirts or bumper stickers. The one I see the most is window decals, okay, where the Salt Life, okay? They have hats too, Salt Life, okay? Someone's making a declaration there, and what they're declaring is their identity and their community. And guess what? Their community isn't in Indiana, it's not in Ohio, and it's not in Kentucky. You know where it is, church family? It's at the beach. It's at the beach, okay? It's along the sea, okay? Where they have salt, It's a declaration of this is who I am, and this is what my life is committed to. Okay, so Jesus comes in and with the branch, and he gives us a metaphor that's kind of like a metaphor for life, okay? So we are to, in all things, be the branch, okay? And what's that mean? What's it mean to be the branch? Well, if you haven't noticed, the vision cast for this year, we had a big new sign up back here, 2024, Growing Deeper Together, and with it is an emphasis on getting deeper into all kinds of groups, study groups, neighborhood groups, transformational groups. That's where you disciple another person, or maybe you as a couple disciple another couple. And the hope is that you'll get a deeper involvement in these groups, and you'll get deeper into the vine and deeper into relationships, and growth will take place, okay? Personal growth will take place, and that's all well and good, but you have to understand what it means to be the branch, right? So I think the best way to explain this is I want to talk to you a little bit on a personal level what God's been teaching me or maybe been trying to teach me over the years, and I would say especially during the last 3 years since COVID took our world by storm. So clearly the call connect of Jesus to his disciples, and according to John in John 15, and really the rest of the New Testament as well, is we as Christ followers are to be the branch. We are to be living out branch life, okay? We are a community of people who are to live out of that identity because we are branch people that are connected to the vine, and we are to remain tapped into the vine. Okay, or if we want to put it this way, and this is in your notes, or you can make a note of this, we could say, and you can write this down, I'm going to find my significance in who I am. I'm going to find my significance in who I am, not in what I do. Okay, the world doesn't work that way. Everybody talks about what they do, right? What do you do? Okay, we're going to find our significance in who I am, not in what I do, which is the same as saying I find my identity, my significance in Jesus, the vine, right? Not in anything I do. So let's stick with I'm going to find my significance in who I am, not in what I do. Okay, but the key is I want to find my significance, my worth, my identity, not in what I do, but by who I am. And to be honest with you, I know I've known this for quite some time, but what I've discovered is it's just an area in my life that I have to continue to grow in. Okay, I mean, now the point is, I mean, going back to the question of what does it mean to be a branch, it's interesting to me that Jesus doesn't talk to his disciples and say, hey guys, gather around, I've got a handout for you. Okay, I've got some printouts because I've got this 5-year strategy for when I'm going. Because in chapter 14, he says, I'm going to go away and you guys are going to be in charge, right? Okay, so I've got this handout, okay, and a 5-year strategy for when I'm going. And if you just kind of trace through this 5-year strategy, what you'll see is you're responsible for different stuff, okay? But I've provided you all with a task list that I need each of you to fulfill. And if you'll just do these things, you're going to change the world. Okay, the mission's going to be accomplished, okay? So here's the 5-year strategy. Here's your task list, and just work through it and trust the system. Now, is that what happens, church? No, that's not what happens. I mean, I've read through the discourse a number of times, and that conversation never takes place. No, instead, Jesus reminds them of who they are, okay? And he says, you are the branch. And if you'll remain connected to me, who is the vine, we together will figure this out together and growth will happen. And I will produce in you what you need to change the world. Okay? And the point I want us all to see is, and listen closely because here it is the priority was on connection or remaining, not on production. Okay? The priority was on connection and remaining, not on production. And like I said before, it's one of these things that I've known for decades, and yet I just find myself somehow internally resisting this, okay? Sometimes subconsciously, sometimes consciously. And it's something that really hit hard during the COVID pandemic in the days and the months and the couple years since. And I knew this even before, and I thought I was doing a lot better job than I was. And I wonder if some of you might have experienced this the same, but the truth is I didn't realize how tied my identity and my worth were, how they were tied to those things that I could produce. Right? Has anybody ever discovered any of this, church? Yeah. Like I worked hard before, okay? And then came COVID, okay? And I'd say we worked hard before, and then came COVID, and so much of what we worked for was taken from us. Right? And so what do? Well, you work, and you work hard, trying to produce. And what happened in days and months after is we're not seeing the fruit of the work, okay? And literally our ability to produce in large part was taken away from us. And so for many of us as individuals and as a church, this is what happened. And I saw in myself is that too much of my identity and too much of my self-worth also started to be taken away from me. This can happen in retirement too. It happened a lot of different ways. And too much of my self-worth started to get taken away because I couldn't produce the way that I wanted to produce or the way I used to produce. And what I found in me that was in me is I have this tendency to determine my worth or my success or my significance by what I get done, by what I can accomplish. And at the end of the day, I want to be able to look at something and point at something and say, look, that's what I did. Right? That's what I did. Listen, friends, living the branch life means, and let me put it this way, it means we're defining success by what I do, but by, not by what I do, but by who I know, who I'm connected to, okay? It's not by what I do, it's by who I connect to. I mean, Jesus talks about trees and fruit a number of times in the scripture, and I think it would serve us well to think in terms of vine and branches sometimes when we read those, but case in point. Matthew 7:21 through 23, Jesus says this. It's a pretty familiar passage. You'll recognize it, many of you. He says, not every one of you who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of the Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform miracles? Then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. Now, what I'm hearing there with the vine and branches is, Lord, we did this in your name, and we did that in your name, and we did this and that in your name. And Jesus said, yeah, but I never knew you. You were never connected to me. You weren't remaining in me. Listen, friends, as I believe are finally coming out from under the cloud of COVID, as people are realizing, I'm starting to see a thirst for the spiritual in people once again. In this season, I hope this is something that you're learning along with me, and that is that I had made this one thing too important, and I was making this other thing not nearly important enough. Okay? In other words, I was defining success in my life by what I could do, what I could accomplish, what I could get done, not nearly enough by who I was connected to. So, what does it mean to be the branch? Well, it's about remaining. And it's about being connected, and connected focuses on relationships. So to kind of bring this full circle, there's some relationship examples I'd like to give you of this, okay? Now, this is me, okay? I'm not going to use anybody but me this morning. And this is me. This is true of me as a husband. I've been married 42 years. So I probably should have figured some of this out along the way, and I did, but I've stated already, sometimes I resist, okay? So one of the things I do is I underestimate the value of connecting to my wife, okay? And I'll overestimate the value of being productive, okay? And so here's an example. I'll come home from work on any given day, and we'll have an evening together reasonably free, okay? And generally when I get home, she's got dinner about ready. And you all know my wife likes to walk a lot. So after dinner, she's going to go for a walk, and she'll ask me, do you want to go for a walk? And often I do. I mean, I would enjoy that. I would. I pretend not to, by the way. But I pretend like, we got to go around again, But she knows I do. And I fairly often do that. We walk around the cul-de-sac, which is exactly a half a mile around, and we'll go several times around that loop. But here's what happens. We're walking around, and it's enjoyable. But then, we make the first lap, and we come by the house again. And I notice the grass hasn't been mowed for 2 or 3 days. It's grown a half an inch. It needs to be mowed. Right? It needs to be mowed. And so now I have this crossroads in front of me where I can go with connection or I can go with production. And I just have tended to go towards production because I really like at the end of the day, I mowed the grass. Hey, dear, look out the window. See the grass? I did that. That looks so good. And I don't know if anyone else has this constant mental list of things to do. But I do. It's always there, and boy, does it feel good when you can pull out that list and go, check, right? And to check that one off, Look at what I've accomplished. Check, check, check. Boy, I was good today, And I don't know if anyone else has this consistent mental list of things, but I do, and boy, it feels good, right? Anyone else want to confess their sins today? Okay, yeah, okay then. So truth be told, my natural instinct is to go towards production. Now, if I choose connection instead, and I go for the walk with my wife, and even though I know cognitively, I know this is important too, okay? But it doesn't feel like I've accomplished something. It doesn't feel like mowing the grass, it's tangible. But I can go for a walk with her, and I don't have something that I can point to, and I can't take a picture of it and say, hey, look at what I did, The grass, I can mow the grass, produce something, go for a walk. Connecting to someone, it doesn't necessarily, I don't see the fruit right away, okay? But so this is what I found myself doing, putting the value of production rather than connection, okay? And it's not that I don't want to, and it's not that I don't care to, okay? I do care, but rather it's because there's this list. And there's a lot of things on that list that need to be done, right? Honestly, I didn't have a problem when I was younger. I'm turning into my dad, and I really don't like it. Okay, but I'm like, this is what responsible people do, right? And so here's another one. As a father, or now more so as a grandfather, so this fall, like most of November and all of December, I had about every Friday and Saturday free. Usually that time of year, those days are reserved. Margie just knows. I mean, you can make an occasional exception, but Fridays and Saturdays, Friday's my day off, and Saturday. Those days are for hunting in November and December, and so those were free because I was blessed early this year, and so basically I had every Friday and Saturday in the month of November and December free. What's more, my list of, that list, outside projects that needed completed before November and December, they were done. The bushes were trimmed, the fruit trees were pruned, I cleaned out the gutters, mulched the grass, all the fraud projects were done, getting ready it's all done. I even painted the windowsills, which wasn't on the list till next summer. I ran out of things. I'm like, well, might as well start hitting next year's list, right? And so I got the windowsills painted. So I found myself for the first time in years with Friday and Saturdays free. So in my mind, I had some options, okay? Like I could go with my wife on car rides out to out-of-way places, and she likes to do this. Like she likes to go to the discount grocery store in Losantville. Okay, Henry King's store out there. That you can buy lunch meat on the cheap out there, cheese too. And she likes to do that, and so. But she likes when I go. She'll say, "You want to go along?" Well, want to is the wrong word, right? But to her it's quality time. So yeah, I want to. Okay, or I could suggest, we take the grandkids for the day, or maybe an overnight, and give our daughter a break, and not to mention some quality time with the grandkids. Yeah, that'd be good, Or I could go on with some other connection options that I've thought of. But it's amazing how much time you can spend on our Friday, Saturday just running errands. Like you can turn errands into a day, right? I always realize that with retired people, busiest people I know, that's because they can turn one errand into a whole day, right? You got to do lunch, you got to do breakfast, do the errand, then run lunch, and then, it just takes all day. Need a light bulb for the burnout one in the oven? All afternoon, right? Need to pick up a few 2x4s for next summer's project? Just wash the cars, Or if nothing else, you can use the spiritual one. I'm reading spiritual stuff for the next lesson. Or the next series of lessons, right? Again, just stuff that's on the list that needs to be checked off at some point. But what I find in me, and maybe I'm not the only one, but what I find in me is my tendency goes towards production, because at the end of the day, I can see these things. And if I don't do these things, if I do the connection thing with my family, at the end of the day, I still have that whole list over there, right? It's still there, right? And so I'm just being honest with you all this morning, but there is this internal struggle that goes on within me. And sometimes I get it right, and I do the connection thing. And sometimes I find myself on the production thing rather than the connection thing. And so the context that John is laying out here, obviously, is a very important spiritual thing. And we do this, I think. I do this. I'm talking about me. In my relationship with Jesus, I do it all the time, okay? Not as much as I used to, but I still, too much, okay? I put the priority on production and think he'll understand about the connection, right? He knows my intent. It's not what I'm doing, but he knows my intent. But it's ridiculous, right? I know, and I've known this for years and years. In fact, it's been my practice in ministry that whenever production slows down, it's a reminder to me, focus on the connections. Focus on the, prayer, preaching, and people. And when it slows down, you focus on the prayer and the people, the relationships, right? And which tells you there's a struggle going on within me, which is crazy in some ways for me as a preacher to slip into the cycle. But I'm telling you, sometimes I do. Sometimes I do. And let's say it's Friday, okay? And Fridays, my sermon isn't finished. And I think most of you know that I try to finish my sermon on Thursday because Friday's my day off. But that's just hypothetically speaking, say it's Friday and my sermon isn't nearly finished yet for Sunday, and Sunday's coming, and it always does. Right, until it doesn't, when Jesus comes, right? So it's Friday morning, and I know my sermon it starts Thursday night because I know it's not done. I go to bed thinking about my sermon on Friday, right? Anybody else? Something like that? Yeah, I'm already thinking about it, which causes me to wake up early. Okay, so I wake up early, and I know if I spend an hour on my sermon, I'm going to have 500 to 1,000 words to show for it. That's about my pace. I'm an early bird, and my best production time is in the morning. If I sermon writing in the afternoon, production slows down. So what about breakfast and prayer and devotion time? Okay, time talking to my wife, all that's connection time. And that's usually the first thing we do in the morning. And we take care of Toby. I take care of Toby the Wonder Dog's needs, okay? But now it's Friday, and the sermon isn't done. And because it's not done, I wake up early, and I just jump right in. And in an hour or two, I can crank out a bunch of sermon, okay? And so what do? And I'm being honest here this morning. Sometimes I just go over to the table where my computer was left right there, set up, ready to go, and I'll just focus on production. And I skip over the connection and breakfast and talking to my wife and all that. Can't skip over Toby the Wonder Dog because there'll be no peace till he's addressed. Okay, so you have to take care of Toby. But here's the irony that I should know by now, and sometimes this wins out and sometimes it doesn't. But that is, if I spend an hour over here in connection, the productivity of my production is far greater. Okay? I know it. And yet, it doesn't always win. Okay? But if I don't, and I spend an hour, if I just spend an hour digging the well, there'll be water there, right? There'll be water there to get out. But if you don't spend time digging in the well, the water's a lot tougher to get because it doesn't come nearly as easily. And so in this season we call 2024, in this season where I believe we're finally coming out from under the cloud of COVID and all that comes with it, I really believe this is something that Jesus wants us to grab a hold of if you're a follower, if you're a branch, okay? Because for way too long, our Western world, even in the church, we've put the focus on production, and our Savior's heart has always been connection first. Jesus' final words to his disciples were, you be the branch. You stay connected to me. You remain in me, and I'll bring the production. In me, you will bear much fruit. You see, friends, I would submit to you that this is what happened to John. For John's story is one where he starts out as a son of thunder. I mean, that's how Jesus talks about him, because he's maybe a little angry. He's got a temper, a short fuse. He's quick to retaliate. That's called down fire from heaven, And I believe that people who have been around John probably thought, we need to encourage that man, They probably told him, hey, bro, you got to learn how to chill out. You need to work on dialing that down a little bit. You need to be more kind, especially now. I mean, dude, you're hanging out with Jesus. You need to be more kind. You're too harsh. You need to be more gentle and self-controlled, more loving. Come on, man. You need to be like Jesus, But John, he knew the family tree. So he's like, well, that's just where I came from, okay? And my brother James, he's the same way. And you've seen a man, it runs in the family tree. But then he starts to spend time with Jesus, and the more time with Jesus, so much so that a few years go by and he really never leaves the side of Jesus, and things, they begin to change. And the fruit in his life begins to look a little different, or a lot different. So much so that when Jesus is hanging on a cross, he's worried about his mom, and he says, John, you take care of her. And I'd be like, really? You're entrusting your mom to a son of thunder? That's what you're going to do? Well, yeah, but that's not who he is anymore, right? Because there's something different about him now. And though he's still tough, now he is also tender. Friends, you start reading through John's letters, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and I would encourage you to do this, but you read through those letters and you'll hear the same thing again and again and again. And we all know when it's repeated like that, it's not only important, but it's probably the central theme. And so it would be fair to say, so what's the central theme that John wants to communicate later in his life? Well, you read those letters, and he's just going to talk about love. He loved to talk about love and how we should love one another. And so you see this change where once he's connected to the family tree, that tree that has a lot of anger and a lot of bitterness and a lot of harsh words, and then he connects to the vine, and he starts to produce peace and joy and love. I mean, it's truly an amazing story. He begins his ministry, and he's referred to as the son of thunder, but by the end, he's described as the one whom Jesus loved. And I like that. I mean, who described him that way? Well, he did. I mean, he didn't use, but what he was doing is he didn't want to use his own name in the story. He just refers to himself as the one whom Jesus loved. And I love that. Why? Because he's identifying himself not based on his production, but rather on his connection. Like, here's what's true about me, John's saying. All you really need to know about me is, you don't need to worry about my name, and you don't need to worry about where I came from or about what I have accomplished. Here's what you need to know. Jesus loves me. I'm the one whom Jesus loves. And he learned to live out of that identity, and it just changed everything. So listen, friend, I don't know about your family tree, but I think what John would tell us all is, listen, you don't have to be who you've been. Who you're from doesn't have to determine who you become, right? So, be the branch. Connect to Jesus and remain in him, and let him do for you what you cannot do on your own. And all God's people said, let's pray that it might be so.